thanks, Sam. This is John. We're working in alphabetical order once again today, and Sam, I sometimes think you should have had a job as an auctioneer. You go through that material so quickly in the beginning. We're going to be breaking our presentation down into two parts today, and we'll separate them with a 5-minute break and some questions. Since I come at the beginning of the alphabet, I guess I'm going to start off. We'll be talking about some things like premiums and bonuses and so forth under Truth in Savings and Regulation DD. We'll talk some advertising there, advertising compliance. We'll talk a little bit about the concept of interest on demand deposit accounts and how that's changed things, changed the landscape since a couple of years back. We'll speak briefly about referral fees, and we'll talk a little bit about some IRS concerns. During the second half of our program, Andy's going to talk more about sweepstakes and contests. He'll also mention some IRS rules and regulations, and he'll get into the discussion of lotteries. And you'll also see that Andy has included some material or some information having to do with social networking toward the end of our program. So without further ado, let's dive into the section having to do primarily with deposit accounts and things you can and cannot do, and what you need to do when you make some of these decisions. Start off by tolling the death knell for Regulation Q. Those of you who have been in compliance for a while know that Regulation Q actually went away a little over 2 years ago, and since then there's the prohibition on paying interest on demand deposits has been gone. That was a law, believe it or not, that went on our books almost 80 years ago, and was finally repealed by, yes, our good friend, the Dodd-Frank Act, beginning on July 21st of 2011, 1 year after the Dodd-Frank Act was passed. The definitions of interest and premiums, however, which you found in Regulation Q primarily, have been preserved by the FDIC when they moved them over into their regulation on interest on deposits, into their definition on insurance on deposits. And the reason that they had them there was that at one time or another there was a special special insurance coverage that applied to demand deposits that did not earn interest, so they defined what interest was. But all of that is moot now because even that's gone. So there's no need really to be able to define interest, at least in the regulation, and we won't even go look at that definition really. However, what we are going to do is talk about demand deposits at some length here this morning. Demand deposits are deposits that are defined in a Federal Reserve regulation. That regulation is Regulation D. It's 12 CFR Part 204. And in Section 204.2 of that regulation, there are a number of definitions of various types of deposits. The purpose of that regulation, by the way, is the establishment and maintenance of reserve requirements on deposit accounts, and in order for the Federal Reserve to mandate those reserves, they had to define the various types of accounts that would be subject or could be subject to those demand deposit requirements. So among those that are subject to reserve requirements are demand deposits and other transaction accounts. So there's a definition of demand deposits within that regulation. It does not include, that is, demand deposits don't include now accounts or what you may know as ATS or automatic transfer from savings accounts, because those now accounts and ATS accounts have ownership restrictions, and because actually technically they're forms of savings accounts that have check access, and because under the regulation for NOW accounts and ATS accounts, there's a requirement that you as a bank reserve the right to require at least 7 days notice of intent to withdraw from those accounts. Reserving that right and actually requiring that notice are two entirely different things. It's by and large a technicality, but it's something you're supposed to have somewhere buried in your deposit account agreement for NOW accounts and ATS accounts. However, you cannot have a right to, or you cannot require notice on demand deposit accounts because then they wouldn't be payable on demand. The other thing is that demand deposits are something that anyone is eligible to hold. It can be held, a demand deposit can be held by individuals, it can be held by businesses, corporations, LLCs, partnerships, you name it. There are no restrictions on ownership of demand deposits other than any restriction that a financial institution wants to impose itself. For instance, a bank might decide that it won't offer a demand deposit account or any form of transaction account, for that matter, to anyone under the age of, I don't know, let's pick an arbitrary number, 16. And therefore, they would have an eligibility requirement for their particular accounts. But there's nothing in the regulation or in the law that says that there is a restriction on ownership of a demand deposit. Okay, a couple of examples of demand deposit accounts, and these are taken pretty much out of the regulation. One would be any account where there is no reservation of right to require 7 days notice of withdrawal, other than a certificate of deposit. So it's any account other than a certificate of deposit where there's no reservation of right to require 7 days notice of withdrawal. Those accounts, if you have an account on your books that you don't call a checking account and you don't have a reservation of right to require 7 days notice of withdrawal, and it's not a certificate of deposit, it will, for the purposes of the reserve requirement anyhow, still be a demand deposit account. Also, any non-renewable time deposit that has matured is a demand deposit account by regulation. So if you offer time deposits, that is certificates of deposit, that don't automatically roll over, then when they mature, they should be classified as demand deposits on your call report, and they should be called demand deposits for the purposes of filling out your, let's see, it's the Federal Reserve Form 2900, if I remember correctly, on which you actually calculate your reserve requirements. Or it could be a certificate of deposit where the original maturity or notice period was actually less than 7 days. So, in theory, I suppose you could write a certificate of deposit for 5 days. If you did so, even if it earned interest, whether or not it earned interest, it would be legally or technically and regulatory-wise considered a demand deposit because it has that original maturity of less than 7 days. And finally, it would be a demand deposit could be the situation when you've got a savings account or a money market deposit account that has, for which the bank doesn't impose effective transfer limits. In other words, if you marketed your savings account and said unlimited transfers and you allowed your customers unlimited transfers from that account or unlimited transfers from a money market deposit account, then those would actually be demand deposits with respect to the regulation, and you'd be misclassifying them on your call reports and on your Form 2900. Other than NOW accounts or ATS accounts. Remember, NOWs and ATSs are sort of hybrids. They legally are savings accounts, but from a practical perspective, they operate like checking accounts, so that those actually don't have transaction limitations upon them. Only savings and money market deposit accounts.